After a long and exhausting day, I found myself alone in the library. Normally, I would leave the building when my shift ended and merge with the evening traffic. But tonight, I had to stay to check the documents. The director had specifically asked me. Trusting no one else, he left it to me. A slight shiver ran through me, and the combination of fatigue and solitude made the silence of the building feel sharper. The library was enormous. While some parts of the ground floor were lit, the upper floors and the basement were shrouded in darkness. Walking among empty shelves, high ceilings, and spacious study rooms made my steps feel heavier, and the silence was palpable in every corner. The boundary between light and dark stood before me like an invisible wall, forcing me to step carefully. I took out my medication from my bag. I used it daily to control anxiety and insomnia attacks. I swallowed it with a sip of water, feeling a slight relief, though the fatigue and tension had not completely vanished. Sitting at my desk, I began checking the documents. The tapping of my pen and the rustling of papers were the only sounds, surrounded by deep silence. After working for a while, boredom and monotony began to get to me. I stood up, deciding to wander around the building. Walking through the wide corridors and empty shelves initially felt calming, but the dark areas started making me uneasy. Shadows seemed to move differently. I reminded myself that it was just my tiredness and the effect of my medication. I moved toward the back of the ground floor. The doors of empty study rooms were slightly ajar, and a cold draft slipped through. A small roof window let the wind in, making the doors creak and emphasizing the silence even more. With each step, my heart beat a little faster, and the thought that someone might be in the empty rooms crossed my mind. Approaching the basement stairs, I became more aware of my footsteps and heartbeat. The darkness below deepened, and the metal door hinges and old pipes whistled with the wind. I felt my mind becoming confused. I couldn't tell whether the sounds were real or imagined. The combination of fatigue and medication made every shadow appear a bit more threatening. I opened the basement door. The metal was cold, the hinges creaking. I stepped cautiously. Aside from my own footprints on the dusty floor between the old shelves, there were no other traces. Yet, a distant murmur from the basement, like a whisper from the depths of the building, reached my ears. I held my breath and waited. The sound ceased, but unease had settled inside me. I went upstairs, wandering through the wide corridors. Every corner, every empty office, seemed like a void swallowed by darkness. Shadows shifted, the boundaries of light seemed to play tricks. Sometimes, a shape flashed quickly between the shelves. My eyes were tired, my attention scattered, and I couldn't tell what it was. Fear and tension rose slowly. Returning to the ground floor, I sat at my desk again. I tried to focus on checking the documents, but my attention kept drifting to the tapping noises from above, and the faint murmurs from the basement. The rustling of paper, the creaking of door hinges, the wind in the windows, all of it combined to form images in my mind that weren't really there. Taking a short break, I walked a few steps along the corridor. Sudden taps from empty rooms and the movement of shadows accelerated my heartbeat. I tried to remind myself that it was only my imagination, but the fatigue and medication made it harder to distinguish reality. Every shadow seemed more menacing, every whisper more profound. I gathered courage to look at the basement again. My steps on the stairs were unsteady, shadows sliding between the shelves, and the murmurs of old pipes combined in my mind, giving the impression that someone was down there. Yet every time, silence prevailed. What I saw or heard remained uncertain. Back at the ground floor, the lights in the study rooms seemed darker than before. I sat at my desk, trying to focus on the documents, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind was weary, my eyes heavy. I felt constantly that something was wrong, though I reminded myself it was just fatigue and the medication's effect. Slowly, the night wore on. Except for a few lit areas, the library was completely dark. Every small sound from the corridors, every creak or whistle from the hinges or wind, pressed on my chest. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, shadows moving among the empty shelves became more distinct. I felt as if I was seeing things that weren't really there. As dawn approached, the darkness of the basement and upper floors still cast an oppressive silence. A shadow seemed to stretch toward my desk. I shivered and took a deep breath. At that moment, The main door opened, and the director entered. His expression was a mix of concern and mild sternness. "Is everything all right?" he asked, his voice carrying both curiosity and caution. I nodded and, under the influence of my medication, told him that my mind had just been playing tricks on me. The director turned on all the lights on the ground floor, illuminating the shelves and empty rooms. The brightness eased, the eeriness created by the previous darkness, though the silence still weighed heavily. After quickly checking the rooms, the director went to his office. Once he closed the door, the silence spread across the corridors again. But the tapping, creaking, and distant murmurs persisted. At first I thought the sounds were caused by his movements, but a few minutes later, the sounds continued despite his office door being closed. Fatigue, medication, and darkness combined to make me perceive the sounds as even more intense and menacing. My heart raced, my breathing uneven. I could no longer endure it. I went to my desk, grabbed my bag and a few belongings. The long silent corridors, the dark corners, and the persistent tapping pressed on me as I carefully made my way out. The library had become more than a place. It had transformed into a living entity in my mind. Even after stepping outside, the tapping continued. At first I thought the director had returned to make the noises, but over time, I realized the sounds were constant. The dark corridors, high ceilings, and empty rooms continued to carry an unknown tension. My breathing quickened, my heart pounded violently. I decided to head home immediately. Otherwise, the sounds would never leave me. About half an hour later, I arrived home, and the noises began to fade slowly. I threw myself onto the bed without delay and fell asleep. Later in the evening, my phone rang. It was the director. His voice carried a hint of concern. "Why did you leave the library without finishing the work?" I still couldn't identify the source of the sounds. I had initially thought the tapping and murmurs came from him leaving, yet they had continued throughout the night. I explained my tension, fear, and what I had experienced. The director calmly clarified. "I didn't come in the morning. I went to the library in the afternoon. Everything was messy, work unfinished. The sounds were just normal creaks of the building. The medication you took must have played a bad trick on your mind." I dropped the phone. Fear and tension overtook me entirely. Fatigue, the effect of the medication, and psychological pressure combined to leave me frozen. At that moment, one thing was certain. I would never set foot in that library again.